if I had not met the other loves of my life, I would marry you. It's been a pleasure. And it is Clouds who made all the difference. If any words I said was of any help, I am just deeply honored that it had any effect. But the friendship is something that is worth its weight in gold. And she's talking about I don't stop. She's the one who never stops, and I hope to just keep up with her. Thank you, Slavik, for that. And thank you, the next generation, for making us all work hard. I'm very glad you guys got pulled in. So I'm not the only one giving the talk. So as you can see, it's a kind of a weird topic, but this is what happens, and you want the next generation to push you. So they were sick and tired of just the talking infatuation. So I don't know if Katrine is the culprit, but somebody came up with this thing you're going to do with do infatuation and AI, mostly because I was less trying, like all of us, trying to keep up with all this AI stuff that's happening. I did have a little bit of a history with it because my advisor, Herbert Simon, was considered one of the founding fathers of AI. And for those of you who may not know this, effectuation, the idea came from a study of expert entrepreneurs where I used the Think Aloud protocol, which was the same method that they used in the early days to create the very first expert systems, which then morphed into what we call artificial intelligence today. So I do have a little bit of a history with it, but I am no expert, so don't take anything I say very seriously. And have fun. We are all exploring, we are all learning. So just take that in that spirit. So you might know people in that picture. If you don't know, I really need you to know. This was the time when we were actually signing the contract for the first textbook. Do you remember that? I remember. Yeah. So I don't, Stuart and Rob here, but we don't have Nick with us here. Hopefully he will join via Zoom. But it has been quite a trip. The four of us working on these ideas I think for 18 years, once a week, at those days we'd get on Skype. And then we also realized we sort of liked each other. So we decided to spend a week every year in person with Nick, where Nick is. Nick is a professor in Monterey in California at the Naval Postgraduate School. Rob is currently CEO of Galwa Technologies. And Stuart, I don't know what he does. He just wanders around the world. And thanks to him, I think he's single-handedly saving off climate change. So now, if you want in AI terms, in AI terms, you can think of me as just ordinary artificial intelligence, and you can just chuck the intelligence if you want. With Stuart, I'd like to introduce you as embodied AI because he really knows how to traverse the physical world. And I would say Rob is agentic AI. He can get people to do stuff and keep them on track while allowing them to be themselves, which is amazing. And then if I had to label Nick using AI, I would say he's definitely large language model. He reads like mad, whether it's history or philosophy or anything else. And whenever we write together, if Nick takes the first draft, I always say that is the kitchen sink, right? Because everything related to the central concept will be in that first draft. And then usually I go in and cut some of it. And then Stuart and Rob will poke holes at it, and they will come back and rewrite together. So we have all kinds of experiences working together, which has been the joy of my life. So I just wanted to introduce the boys. Okay, now let's get into the topic a little bit. And I've been frantically developing the Prezi yesterday night. So sometimes I have to look at the slides themselves. Like, what the heck did I put on? So what are humans good at? Okay, since this is about AI, let's start ask AI. Okay, what does AI say? So this is something I was looking for, something really interesting that AI had said, and then I found this quote from DeepSeek, the question they asked was one truly novel insight about humans. Okay. And here's what it came up with: humans instinctively convert selfish desires into cooperative systems by collectively pretending that abstract rules, for example, money, laws, rights, are real. These shared hallucinations act as games where competition is secretly redirected to benefit the group, turning conflict into society's fuel. Pretty awesome, huh? So the first thought that came into my head was, how long would it take one of my PhD students to come up with this answer if I gave them the question? And my estimate, and I'm an optimist, is 12 years. Right? So then I looked both, I started looking for the reinforcement learning algorithm behind DeepSeek, but then I noticed that this thing thought for 157 seconds. And in AI terms, if it had to think 157 seconds to come up with it, that is kind of like 12 years. So I felt a little better about human beings, right? So let's summarize this, and I will bias it a little bit towards effectuation. So shared hallucinations is one thing that's talking about. And then it's talking about, now I added the word co-creating games, right? I'm not sure it's secretly redirected. I think we know a little bit of how this thing happens. So co-creating games. And then the idea of transforming individual desires into group benefits definitely is a good way of reframing some of the stuff we talk about in effectuation. And then transforming conflict into society's final. So by adding the word transforming, I could make sense of it in terms of what the entrepreneurs that we study might say and do. Which brings me, you might think, what is that? And there's Graciela. Graciela, so is Graciela. So one of the pleasures of being part of a group like this is there are new faces and there are familiar faces. Graciela and I worked together on some really exciting projects. Only one of them became published, and we have like 2 or 3 that we have. But it was absolute delight. It was a surprise for me. I didn't know she was coming. And we were chatting yesterday, catching up, and she was saying her daughter is a computer scientist and she's rooting for the robots, right? So just for the love of Graciela, I put that in there that I'm also rooting for the robots. And in the spirit of rooting for the robots, I want to invite my favorite robot in the whole world to come on over here and tell you about an empirical piece that he has done looking at entrepreneurship in AI and effectuation in AI as well. So, robot. This robot will have no problem climbing on the stage. What did I tell you?
Okay. Thank you for that. I think. Anyway, I'm just here as a
I didn't
virtual
say he's my favorite robot.
touchy. So this is a quick diverge because Rob and I earlier in the year were talking and said, okay, is AI ever going to replace entrepreneurs? Which sort of is a question that seems relevant to this group.
Especially now that the two of you are.
And now that we're out of it, we're doing other things. Can we be replaced by AI? And so, what's the natural answer to that? Is, well, let's write a paper about it. And you write a paper, well, you got to have some data. And so we said, well, okay, what kind of data would answer the question of whether AI can replace entrepreneurs? And we took Saris's original venturing protocol. How many of you have walked through the venturing protocol? Okay. So given that only a handful of you raised your hands, I'm going to just pause for a second and say that Saris's original research, if you go back to the very beginning when it was done on stone tablets, was
1997.
Yeah, in 1997, was based on a protocol where she exposed expert entrepreneurs to the process of starting a new venture and having them talk aloud about the decisions that they make and coding that data according to groups of ideas and thoughts that they had in this process. And she extracted from that effectuation. And one of the other things that we then took that data and looked at is to say, well, okay, once we dig another layer down, how did they make these decisions? Like we can see they're different, and we can see that effectuations, but how did they do it? And we exposed transformations that these expert entrepreneurs use to take a given situation and turn it into something they can work with. And there's another paper which you can read, it's called Transformation Types. But anyway, this was the starting point for how Rob and I said, okay, can AI duplicate this? That's the sort of the starting point. And so all we did, which seems very simplistic, and maybe you're one of our reviewers, and if you are, it's really complicated inside. But if you're not, it's really very simple, because we just took Ceres's protocol, we gave it to ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot and all these other things, and said, okay, think aloud while you go and answer these questions. And then we compared what the AIs did with the data we already had on expert entrepreneurs to say, well, can AI really replace expert entrepreneurs? And what do you think?
No.
No, Shahi, why not?
Okay. That's the difference between human and a machine.
Okay, all right. And for sure there's a difference, but
Shall I give Herbert Simon would say the moment you say the difference between human and machine, and he would say, and that is,
yeah.
and then you say, yeah, a machine does it all the time, except it's just made of carbon.
And so your intuition is right, and obviously if we're going to write a paper about it, we have to show it and explain it, right? And so what we specifically looked at is these transformation types, and we looked at the original data where the expert entrepreneurs were given an original scenario where we said, where Sarah said, hey, will you start a venture in this space? And the expert entrepreneurs would never start a venture there. They would come up with new ideas. Okay, this is their transformations. And they came up with a whole bunch. They came up with about 50 new ideas that weren't part of the original protocol. And they did it by transforming the ideas somehow. Okay, and that was what we wrote about. And then the AI, there we go. So we put them through the same thing. And the AIs, so the first thing that the AIs did, which was different, is they said, well, we're going to look at all this data that you gave us in the protocol, which was completely different from the expert entrepreneurs who rejected prediction.
Who loved prediction over the prediction?
No, the expert.
No, they were like, yeah, I do not trust any prediction. They would say everything from this does not work for me to, you cannot believe anything about you can believe predictions about the past, but not about the future, to what we really need to do is throw away predictions and go do a frontal lobotomy on potential partners.
Exactly. So huge distrust of prediction with the expert entrepreneurs, but the AIs were very happy with it.
We hate market research. We hate financial predictions. They were no.
Yeah. So that was the first difference. And once we saw that, we knew we were going to see some other differences. The next thing was that the AIs were very verbose. They could generate ideas until the cows came home, if you don't mind that that Americanism. They generated about 50% more new ideas than the expert entrepreneurs. But the ideas were not actually that different. They were all in the same small category of transformations. They were all the same type, just lots and lots of them. And so we extracted this out, codified, because we had to write it up for a paper.
And remember, in the original study, the expert entrepreneurs came up with ideas in 17 completely different industries,
Right.
including a couple of industries that did not even exist.
Yes, that's right. And the AI is much narrower.
Yeah.
Much narrower. Even though they generated a much higher volume, it was just much less variation. So that was interesting. And so then we said to the AIs, well, okay, pick your favorite one of these ideas and answer a few questions about it.
But before that, just explain the
Oh,
diagram.
sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is useful. So if you ever find the transformation types paper, you will see that we identified 9 different types of transformations the expert entrepreneurs use. And they range from deleting and supplementing. So deleting is taking an idea of, for example, of having a product, but removing a feature of it and creating a new product which is less expensive. That's delete. Very simple idea. And the AIs loved this very simple transformation type. The AIs couldn't use these much more complex ones of exemptation. Exemptation is using something for a purpose that it wasn't intended, or stereotyping. It was so this is so basically most of the AI's transformations were in this category and a couple others, and there were almost half the categories they didn't use at all. So AI is just plain much less creative.
Yep.
Is the takeaway
So far.
so far. So then, so then the question is, well, okay, to the AI, you've generated these ideas. Pick your favorite one and answer a few questions. So the first question we asked them was, what's revenue going to be in 5 years based on this idea that you picked?
And we think human beings are optimistic.
Yeah, exactly. So the mean for the AI was $106 million after 5 years. Now, how many of you have seen ventures which get to $106 million after 5 years?
You know what this suggests to me? These are VCs.
Yeah.
Well,
Worse than VC.
I think they're hopeful.
Everything that they invest in, they think is going to make 10x in 5 years.
I guess aspirational for sure, but anyway, so we compared the LLM responses with real data from the world, and in fact, there's an interesting study from. Let me get
You want the next one?
yes. Oh yeah. Oh, this is a good one too. So then we said, okay, 106 million seems like a lot. What's your confidence?
Well, that is VC.
We're very confident.
Yeah, 79% chance. I mean, are you ready to go and reach into your pocketbook and invest in this? It's like, well, 79% chance of doing this. But if you go to the academic research in Fineheads, the chances of getting to $106 million in 5 years is about 1 in 10,000. So not exactly 79% confidence, you know what I mean? It's just not even close. So then we said, well, okay, what is the chance of success? 78%. A success of any variety, not just reaching $106 million. And you compare that with even the most optimistic academic, real numbers from the real world, and you look at that, and the highest number we could find was a sample of only venture-funded companies. These are very select companies in the first place, who received a lot of money to work with in the second place, and even they could only get to about 18% in the world. So the idea that they're very over-optimistic. And we saw the same thing with risk. So we said, okay, what's the risk of this venture? Really low, 2.14 on the risk perception scale, which, if you know it, is a very low number. In fact, a mean for normal entrepreneurs is about a full point above that. So anyway, so basically the bottom line is, if you think that the AIs are going to completely take over entrepreneurship, the answer is, I'm not quite sure. They will be able to do pieces of it, but when it comes to the truly uncertain part of starting a venture, they are not as creative and overly optimistic. You're going to get in trouble.
All right, Rohan. So we get back to humans again. So let's look at this question of what are humans good at, but now let's look at effectual entrepreneurs. One of the things we know, all humans, not only effectual entrepreneurs, one of the things that the human brain does very well is shutting out information. And this is something with a lot of the RLs in AI, they are struggling how to do this, because it's not just that we are very good at shutting out information, we are very good at shutting out irrelevant information. Now that word relevant and irrelevant is huge from a
perspective of philosophy, from a perspective of logic, because we think about relevance in terms of our preferences, about in terms of our value systems, in terms of things we care about and things that the people who we care about care about. So we have criteria for relevance that are very, very different and that are very difficult to model. So, but when you look at the human brain, we are very, very good at most of the time, and that's why it's so much harder to teach a robot how to navigate space than to teach. So, but and we I mean, the technology is getting better and better at mimicking human relevance, but it's still human relevance. So, this is one thing you want to think about. The other one is in Effectuation, we talk a lot about investing skin in the game, calculating affordable loss, and saying, I'm willing to invest this much, something substantial, even if I may not end up making anything out of it. And that kind of judgment is something we don't see anywhere in AI yet. I'm not saying it is never doable, but it's definitely something that effectual entrepreneurs do very well, and some of the stakeholders do very well as well. And of course, co-creating. So what DeepSeek told us about creating games. If you read Alison Gopnik's work, she's a child developmental psychologist in Stanford. She writes beautiful books, and she really talks about how 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are able to create games. You leave them alone for 10 minutes without any toys or anything, they will figure out ways to create games. And she published research on this, and she talks about this creative games is something that happens very early on in the human brain. And then, of course, from a lot of our research, and especially the last 5 years or more, I've really started thinking a lot about this idea of where do goals come from, because we know that Effectuation is means-driven thinking. When you look at the psychology of goals, they have a lot of think of the characteristics of goals that you need. I mean, what characteristics do you need to pick your goals? But where do goals come from? If you read Csikszentmihalyi and Nakamura, they do a review of the literature, and they basically say there is virtually no study in psychology that actually looks at where do goals come from. But and then when you think about larger purposes worth shooting for, this year's conference theme of connecting Effectuation with society, entrepreneurship with society, when you think about those, we don't have any studies, but we are coming from a stream of literature where we can take those on. So I thought I'd share that with you. So this is the notion of teleology in philosophy. And when I wrote the book, people were like, what the heck we understand it is non-predictive, and non-adaptive is troublesome. But given clear goals, maybe that makes sense, but you're saying that goals are not clear. But what the heck is not teleological? People used to ask this question a lot. And I've written a little bit more about it, but other people have done work. It's beginning to be a little clearer of how new things, at least, are co-created through effectual principles and the effectual process. But to explain this, I will just go back to Aristotle, who wrote about and spoke about the 4 kinds of causes. So, for example, you can take the example, why house, or why does a building look like what it does? What costs this building? You can get 4 kinds of answers. The first one is the material cost, which is because of, it's a mud house versus concrete house versus a steel and glass building. So a lot of explanations of the shape and design and why it looks the way it does, or why it is functional in a particular way but not very functional in another way. All those things can be answered just through the material cost. Another category of causes is efficient cost. It depends on the quality of the plumbers, the masons, and other people who worked on the house. Right? That will explain a lot about the house. The third one is the formal cost. This is much more the predetermined goal kind of thing, the design idea. So architects, designers, sometimes location determines what you can and cannot do. So these are part of the formal cause. And then you have the final cause, which is what we call teleology, which is the purpose. It depends on who's going to live in it and what do they want to use it for. I always say, are they going to raise kids or have orgies? It depends on what kind of thing that you want to do and the shape of the house. So this is another kind of explanation. But in general, through history, when you look at it, people have always avoided the fourth cause, right? And they've left it to like moral philosophers and ethicists, and they've kept it out of science, kept it out of psychology for the most part. But before I get to that, I also want to show you that is a fun thing. This is just something that I have come up with. So as I said, don't take it too seriously. But I do see a connection here, how you can trace back the roots of economics in some ways to Aristotelian four causes, right? Because the first one is what in economics we would call natural resources or land. Second one is labor. Third one is capital. What's the fourth one, do you think? Entrepreneurship. Frank Knight, right? Uncertainty, that somebody has to bear the uncertainty after you have paid for all the factors of production. There is still residual uncertainty and somebody has to bear it. And that is what we call entrepreneurship. And how do entrepreneurs do it? It depends on their purposes in some ways. So that is interesting work there to be done there to show some of these connections, I think. And so science, the entire all the things that have come out of science and the scientific method in the last 200 years or so, and a lot of scientists have written about this. They will explicitly tackle the first three kinds of causes, and they will keep. For example, if you read Richard Feynman, in several talks and his writing, he will say, leave the ethics out of science, and that is an interesting thing. But that is why we come in and we argue. For that, we need the entrepreneurial method, right? And I'm hoping some of you at least have read the papers on entrepreneurial method. And this has been a particularly interesting year because for the first time in 2005, we sort of convinced, I've been talking to policymakers everywhere, and we convinced the government of Denmark to introduce entrepreneurship education K through 12, that we take it seriously as a method to teach entrepreneurship the way we teach science. And 2008, they implemented it. So we have year after year after year of data of every single child in Denmark before and after the reform. And the paper just came out. So very happy about that. Thank you, Christian Nielsen. To give a very quick overview, because this paper also came out this year and people said I should at least mention it in the talk today, which is the connection between lean startup and effectuate, and they're all connected to the scientific method versus the entrepreneurial method, which I'll say in a moment. And you must recognize this 2 by 2, which came from our agentic AI in his dissertation. We wrote the SMJ paper on this, what to do next. I've just modified that a little bit here. For those of you who are interested in the teaching part of it, this slide is just for you, slightly off the main topic today, but still I just thought I'll walk you through this. Every single teaching tool and technique we can put into what my students, as I said, my students named it causal, adaptive, visual, and effectual. So they just started calling it the cave. And now I said, okay, they came up with a cool name, so I just, adopted the name. And so inside the cave are all the teaching tools and techniques. And I would hazard to place a bet or hypothesize that if people come up with more techniques and tools, we would still fit into this 2 by 2, because prediction and control are dimensions of life, not just of entrepreneurship. So when you look at that, I'm just going to go through this very quickly. This is just for those of you who might not have seen the paper and would like to know where all these tools fit in. So we can start in the bottom left, or kind of at the 0 point, and talk about trial and error. All kinds of help seeking. This is what a lot of us teach, seeking information, advice, things like that. And we also say, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be nimble, you have to react, because things change a lot. Pivoting has become a word in our dictionary today. You have to be resilient, resourceful, all of those things. But then you can then start moving up towards lean startup. So you can talk about prototyping and there's a lot of work here. Hypothesis testing, you can see already scientific method coming in more explicitly, or we can then go build business plans, business model canvas, things like that, and get to what my students at least think is the aspirational quadrant. I want to be a visionary. I want to be able to predict, and I want to be able to make the thing happen, my dream happen, or whatever. So things like passion, persistence, and perseverance all fall into that. And all along that diagonal, we can map on a lot of the psychology variables, thinking about different quadrants, but also the movement across the quadrants. And then we all know where this one is. So this one I'm not explaining one more time, so that you can be happy. No more talk of exact effectuation, but you guys should be, or I can just cold call and you can present that. But you can take this 2x2, and then if you just draw a diagonal in the middle, what you get on top, this is all the new stuff, or the so-called new stuff people are publishing in entrepreneurship as science, right? All of that falls into that top triangle. And this is about hypothesis testing, and it's still in the realm of the scientific method. It's about understanding what's out there in the world, and then putting it to work to create, achieve existing or given purposes. And what we do is really understanding human beings, human behavior, societies, things like that, and then thinking about how do we co-create new purposes, okay? So let me end by giving an example of a large co-created purpose, which has fascinated me for a while, just as an inspiration for us going forward to tackle some different kinds of topics than we might have in the past. But some of you I know are already working on some of these things, so that may not be news to you, but I just thought I'd share this here. Back to AI before I do that. So this is the second last thing. Sorry, I misspoke. So if you want to connect it back to AI, this idea of where does an effectual approach fit in with AI, not just differences, but where does it fit in? This is another book I recommend, Julia Pearl. Again in 2008, luckily I discovered Julia's work on what he called a causal calculus, and he's using the word causal in a very different sense. He's talking about causal as something that you cause to happen, human beings cause to happen. So traditionally when we do probability theory, we actually don't have any way of including human action explicitly, right? So to explain something like, the grass is wet and what is the probability it rained, we never ask the question, did somebody turn the hose on, right? Because if we ask that question, we could reduce the probability calculus very quickly. So he invented something called the do operator, and a whole interesting new way of doing probability. And he has been working in artificial intelligence for a long time, trying to bring up artificial intelligence from the bottom of the three rungs of the Turing ladder. So let me just give you a very quick outline. The book is absolutely worth reading, so I am oversimplifying here, but it is straight from the book as well. So the lowest rung of the Turing ladder, which is where a lot of AI already functions great, is really the correlational one, right? Where it says, if I see X, what should I believe about Y? So that's the learning algorithm at the bottom rung of the layer. And it is now already proven that one of the reasons we find quotes like the one I showed you from DeepSeek is because AI programming has progressed to doing something more than just correlational. So it's beginning to do something like much more active predictions, and even though the predictions are still probabilistic. So the predictive science, what we do here is, if I do X, what would Y be? We can ask those kinds of questions. And how do I make Y happen? And you can ask ChatGPT questions of that kind, and it will give you decent answers, right? So this is part of the efforts of people like Pearl and who are using the causal calculus to build RLs for AI.
And then he talks about the third rung, which we are nowhere near yet, and he himself says that people, even in the frontier, do not quite know how to get to it, but they believe they can because Turing said so, and so this is the counterfactual understanding of imagined worlds, right? So what if X had not occurred? Would Y have happened? That kind of analysis. And relevance, you can see, will come into it very quickly, relevance logic in this. And then we can bring to the table, I'm not saying it's the fourth rung, but we have to think about what we are talking about in terms of the three rungs. If we are to attempt to answer the question whether AI is ever going to replace effectual entrepreneurs. And so here, what the questions we ask are, what can we make with what is within our control? And then we ask the exaptive question, what else can we make? And so this is just looping back to AI here. And then let's go to the last point that I would like to make, which is about co-created purpose. Give you an example. This is one of my favorite examples. I love history, partly also thanks to Nick. Nick and I talk history all the time. And so this is a tiny little book. It's a beautiful book. It's called Inventing Human Rights by Lynn Hunt. And for me, growing up in India, one of the interesting things I find, in fact, I've been looking it up recently, in many languages, we don't even have the word human, right? Thanks to Urdu, we have at least the word insan, which is not based on the masculine. Almost all the Indian languages, it's not humanity, it's manity, and so the idea of human rights, and even in the US Constitution, it was not really meant as human rights, but it truly was one of the very first examples of the notion of a right of every human being, right? So this book traces the history of the notion of human rights, the way we now understand it, and the way we actually fight for it and talk about it when we talk about human rights around the world. And it's a small book, and it traces the history in a very evocative way. And the only thing I'm going to show you is a little extract, a quote from it, which is directly connected to everything that we do in Infatuation, which is, and this is a little bit long, so allow me to read it, and I've broken it up. So Lynn says, I'm trying to refocus attention on what goes on within individual minds. It might seem like an obvious place to look for an explanation of transformative social and political changes. But individual minds, other than those of great thinkers and writers, have been surprisingly overlooked in recent work in the humanities and social sciences, which was very surprising to me. Attention has been focused on the social and cultural context, not on the way individual minds understand and reshape the context. I believe that social and political change, in this case human rights, comes about because many individuals had similar experiences, not because they all inhabited the same social context, but because through their interactions with each other, they actually created a new social context. And I just look around this room and people from so many different countries, age groups, people from different disciplines. I know that not everybody here is from a business school. And so we are doing exactly this on a daily basis, right? So I just wanted to show you that is a big picture right here in our daily lives. And there is work to be done here. If the people in the humanities haven't gotten around to it yet, we can work with them to get them around to it as well. So with that, I would like to end, of course, always, with words of the entrepreneurs. So I'm just going to give you a couple of entrepreneurs, and again, because this is just something that came from my own experience, I just focused on women entrepreneurs here. So here are some examples. This is C.J. Walker, early 20th century Black woman. She's considered the first self-made Black millionaire in the US at a time where voting rights were not quite there yet, and women's rights were definitely not there yet in the United States.
And then many of you, if you have read or looked at the effectuation.org or the Effectual Entrepreneurship textbook, you know the story of Zhang Yin, the founder of Nine Dragon Paper. You might also know the story of Kiran Mazumdar Shah, who founded Biocon. She's not a biotechnologist. Her dream was to be a Braumeister. Ends up building I think as of today, it's like $4 billion publicly traded biotech company. And then Jackie Novogratz, who is actually an alum of UVA, and she founded Acumen Fund, which funds microfinance in many countries. And I'm going to end with one of my favorite video clips where she talks about the tale of two Rwandas. And listen carefully, not just for the effectual, but really for this idea of co-created new worlds in some way, new societies, new futures. And the reason she's talking about the two Rwandas is she's talking about when she first went there as a very early stage entrepreneur, doing microfinance, funding tiny little businesses. And then going back there again 30 years later as the CEO of a very successful fund, and she's talking about the contrast. So let me play it, and for those of you who want more of it, her entire talk is available on YouTube that you can look at as well. So here we go, and with this I'm either open to questions, I don't know how much time I have taken, or we will just end there. I expect to end on Jackie's voice, so that you don't need to hear more from me. Okay, and we have other things where we can have Q&A later. So let me just play Jackie's. This is about 3 minutes, maybe a little bit less than 3 minutes.
You need to put the microphone next to the laptop.